Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever in the world you are. Thank you for joining us. This is Keeping It Real with James Valliant and me, Robert Nasir. And I am joined by the successful and published author, James Valliant. Of course, I feel like we may lose him to the Roman provenance of Christianity field due to your great book, James, Creating Christ. Congratulations on your most recent interview and your recent victories in the field. James, how are you doing this morning?
I'm doing spectacularly well. In fact, I am kind of floating on air to have recently have some very distinguished non-objectivist academics in the field come on board with it and accept the truth of its conclusions and praise its logic. So I am kind of floating, I do admit. But I promise I will not. You guys won't lose me. I'm here for the long haul. This represents my deepest values, and I hope it represents important values to our listeners too. If it does, please consider becoming a subscriber to Ayn Rand Center UK. We have different subscription levels now, but if you regard these kind of discussions of philosophy and the ideas of Ayn Rand and Leonard Peikoff as important as I do, please consider becoming hit that like, share, subscribe, comment, and join. And there are different levels of subscriber membership you can. So please consider becoming a paid member of Ayn Rand Center UK. I think we're doing important work here too.
I couldn't agree more. In addition, folks, if you're watching live, please consider hitting that like button and sharing this episode on your social media networks. Extend your reach by sharing this content. Hopefully, though, James, your successes aren't going to lead you into narcissism or any other psychological challenge. You're going to get too good for us. Spend all day staring in the mirror or staring at
I'm pretty darn good. I'm pretty darn good.
There's your mirror right there. And yes, you are awfully darn good. That's our topic for today. We're going to talk about the differences between narcissism and self-esteem and some of the other psychological challenges that some of us face. Now, when you gave me these questions, James, which you handpicked from the edition Keeping It Real by Leonard Peikoff, I initially thought, I've kind of got all that handled. But as always, Leonard Peikoff's insights go deeper than I expect. I'm sure yours will too. So let me jump right to question number one. Leonard Peikoff is asked, do you think psychological problems can hinder or prevent someone from living according to objectivism, such as by undercutting the confidence that would be needed to live this way? Right away, when I read that, I thought, what does it mean to live this way? What do you think objectivism looks like in reality? Oh, Dr. Peikoff's way ahead of me. He starts his answer, which is longer, and we can cut this into a couple pieces, but he says, well, I say such problems can hinder you, but I don't think they would prevent you. You still have enough choice as to what to do. But how easily and naturally you do it is a different question. You might have the kind of problem, for instance, depression, that makes it very difficult for you to act and gives you a tremendous sense of inertia. You might have a lot of anxiety, making it hard for you to disagree with people. You may have a defense mechanism of hostility, making you immediately suspicious and antagonistic, even though you know that's improper. In other words, your psychology can affect your motivation and the defense mechanisms that you've automatized. You can know about these and still act in accordance with your views. To do it serenely, however, you have to deal with your psychology. Sounds pretty straightforward, James. What do you think?
Yeah, well, I think that's exactly correct. No matter if we're short of being, there are cases, I guess there's an exception out there, the true psychotic, the true out of control person who is hallucinating. He's not really connected to reality in the same way we are. He's not seeing reality. He's seeing things and hearing voices, and he's having kind of organically caused problems in his brain that lead to certain delusions. Now that's a very, very, very rare phenomenon. Even the most neurotic among us, insecure people with psychological issues that we're dealing with, we still have free will. We still can control the direction of our thought, how much we think, how intensely we think, and we can still have that thinking matter in our behavior. And because of that, we can have an impact even on our psychology if we correct our thinking, if we correct our behavior. Over time, in most cases, that will actually even improve our psychology, the serenity with which we can be an objectivist. Now, we can know intellectually that objectivist ethics is the way to live, and to implement that is a volitional choice. But it's an achievement of the mind. It's an achievement of knowing what objectivism and what our values are, what's important for us, and enacting it, regardless of perhaps of some psychological pull in a negative direction, some childhood experience, some childhood trauma, something. We all have psychologies. We all have issues. We all have contexts that we're trying to deal with. And sometimes we need to directly deal with those issues if we're really going to be effective and serene in our practice of what we know to be rational and good for us. Ayn Rand said something very, very profound in her philosophy. She said there are three cardinal values that no human being can do without: reason, purpose, and this is the one I want to focus on today, self-esteem. A human being absolutely needs the confidence that what he's doing, that he's able to achieve his values, that he's worthy of achieving those values. If you do not have, now how can that be grounded? Well, it's grounded in that first value she talked about, reason. Your confidence in your own mind must be the actual foundation for any real self-esteem. And if your self-esteem isn't therefore grounded in your confidence in your own mind, if it's not grounded in reason and reality, then you're going to look for an alternative, a substitute, a kind of pseudo self-esteem. And that pseudo self-esteem are the kind of manifestations we're going to be talking about today. They are the false sense of self-esteem. It's the absence of a genuine reason and reality grounded self-esteem that is necessary for a human psychology that actually needs a kind of confidence for its action. In order for us to know what we're doing, to know that we're competent at it, to know we're worthy at it, is an objective matter. And if we don't have that, then we're going to be looking for a substitute, a pseudo kind of self-esteem, usually in the eyes of others, in this false value of prestige or being thought of well by someone else. Those kind of fakes are really just bandages for a lack of genuine self-esteem that is grounded in reason and reality. But Ayn Rand's basic point here is that we need self-esteem. It is not an optional value. Every human consciousness has as a cardinal, primary important value this self-esteem business. And if you don't get it grounded in your confidence in your reason, if you don't get it grounded in fact, then you're going to necessarily be looking to assuage that through some form of pseudo self-esteem, which will be I think the main topic of what we're talking about today.
Excellent. Now the question goes on. There's two parts, two questions here. The questioner says, is there a way to get around this obstacle? Either by solving, other than by solving your psychological problems? That's kind of a loaded question. I've got a problem. I can't solve it. Can I get around it? And Leonard Peikoff says, straight out, I don't know of any. At the least, you'd have to solve your basic psychological problems, the ones that are really undercutting your motivation and your confidence. I don't know how to do that, except by dealing with it. Probably, if they're that significant, through a therapist. Unquote Leonard Peikoff. And that's why, James, I'm glad you discussed confidence. One of my favorite quotes from Ayn Rand, courage and confidence are practical necessities. Courage is the practical form of being true to existence, of being true to truth. And confidence is the practical form of being true to one's own consciousness. Those don't make the list of the big 7 virtues, but really courage is that combination of a reality basis and integrity, and confidence is that combination of integrity and independence.
That confidence thing, that self-esteem thing, the need of consciousness, being true to your consciousness with confidence is exactly it. You can't fake it. look, you are alone with yourself 24/7. You're looking at that guy in the mirror every time you pass a mirror, and he's the one or she's the one who knows the real deal about you. You can't, in one sense, there's no real lying to yourself, however much evasion you do here, because you know at some level, I'm just evading that. And there's a keen relationship between Ayn Rand's statement that one of the three cardinal values is self-esteem, and this notion that confidence is being true to your consciousness, and there's no faking it. When you attempt to fake it, that's when you get into these psychopathologies of anxiety and neurosis and pseudo self-esteem. Boy, did she nail that. Exactly right. No human consciousness can do without that kind of confidence. No human consciousness can really do without self-esteem. It is a primary value for all humans.
Now, I would love to say, at the real extremes, you have psychopathology, psychopathy. We don't know anybody like that. Unfortunately, I have. And so when Leonard Peikoff was then asked, well, is there any validity to the popular term sociopath? I thought, well, there's certainly validity to, I've known people like that. I've known people who have kind of a hole in their heart, so to speak. And Leonard Peikoff answers that real quick here. Yes, by the way, that used to be the term psychopath. In other words, something wrong with your psychology in relation to your mind, your psyche. In our time, of course, society has superseded the mind. So now the problem is described as a problem with society. Sociopath, somebody who has no morals in regard to society.
If I can just interject there, the new term that sort of replaced sociopathy in the psychology world is antisocial personality disorder. So we've gone from psychopath to sociopathy to antisocial personality. Very interesting change in the term of art here for basically the same phenomenon within psychology.
Yeah. We used to think we should have thought of it as something individual. This is somebody with no conscience, somebody who has no moral, not moral sense in the sense of knowing morality, but in the sense that their amorality has no repercussions for them psychologically. Now it's, look what you're doing to society.
Exactly. Just as I noted with Ayn Rand's definition of how self-esteem gets really grounded, it has to be a confidence in your reason, a genuine confidence in your reason, grounded in reality. Otherwise, it's not going to even serve this very function. It's going to misfire. Your psychology ain't going to work right, and you're not going to develop the appropriate confidence level to be able to deal with these things. No, objectivism has a very distinct and unique kind of answer to these kind of psychological questions. The question is not your orientation to others in general, but your orientation to reason and reality that will determine whether it's authentic self-esteem.
Yes. And of course, Dr. Peikoff will go beyond the psychological, although that's an element. He continues with his answer, quote, in either case, what the term designates is a real criminal phenomenon, a total amoralist, somebody devoid of any concern for moral values to the extent that they feel no guilt and no shame, no matter how horrible and criminal their behavior. This is essentially a psychological phenomenon insofar as there has to be something wrong with you over and above the misuse of free will to reach this utterly pathological state. But it does exist, and beyond just criminals, there are nihilists today in our society, in our culture, who revel in the destruction of values in their field. I'm sure you know some of the progressive educators, the non-representational artists, the egalitarians in politics. You could call them psychopaths or sociopaths, but in their case, you can't blame psychology. This is an issue of their convictions. Unquote. That fascinates me, James. That willing desire to destroy, not in a complete drooling beast a la Stephen Mallory, but he was never talking about a drooling beast. He is talking about the openly, willfully nihilistic, something that it's always hard for me to believe in, that there are actually people out there. And then I listened to some of Leonard's lectures, or listen to Andrew Bernstein on Dewey, on education, and there really are people out there who are just destroyers. It's hard to
That
believe.
that was the hardest thing for me to grasp. It really is. I had the lesson. For me, it was the lesson of Dagny Taggart I had to learn. I simply, because I think my American context and my very fortunate background just gave me a very benevolent view of the world. And I just assumed that everybody loved their life to some degree, that people had values to some degree. And like Dagny, I had this optimistic view. All I really have to do is explain to them. All I have to do is show them, and see, they'll come along, they'll get it. No, that's not true. There are people who volitionally and willfully evade. There are people who really do not love their life at all. And benevolence, benevolence towards another human being really can only be objectively grounded in your love for your own life. It is an emanation of your love for your own life that causes all benevolence. If it isn't, then there's some kind of bizarre manipulation going on. There's some kind of power dynamic relation that you're trying to achieve psychologically. And that's where a lot of these pseudo self-esteem issues actually come from. The fact that it isn't just a simple benevolence, my love of my life extending to all of my values, the values like you, Robert, men who share my values. That makes you a value to me, so that now I want nothing but the best for you. I want you to be happy because you are actually a value to me because of the values that we share and the values that you embody. Now, that kind of benevolence can only come, frankly, from my own self-esteem, from my own love of my own life. And anything else is, let me suggest right there, is a perversion of the very idea of benevolence from the outset. It's using people, either materially in a manipulative way, but more often in this area where we're talking psychology, in a psychologically manipulative way of other people. Yeah, sociopath is someone, they typically define them, and we'll define a couple of these, as a lack of empathy for other people. You know, and there's something to moral development as we were growing up. You know, my parents were really good on this idea. You know, how would you like it if some other child came along and stole something that belonged to you? How would you feel if something? So they got through to me this reciprocal nature of empathy. And wait a minute here, there are other people out there like me, but wait a minute, yeah, if I want my values, then I have to respect, in effect, their right to their values on a very basic, how we teach children that basic thing called empathy. And so very frequently sociopathy or the antisocial personality disorder are defined in terms of a lack of empathy. But that lack of empathy, let me suggest, fundamentally boils down to a lack of genuine self-esteem. If these people actually loved their own lives, if their own happiness were in their own minds an end in itself, there'd be no need for this kind of psychological manipulation, the psychological using of people that we're going to get into, and that characterize the antisocial behavior. The antisocial personality type, though, he's unhappy all by himself. You know, that sociopathy guy, he doesn't need other people and that lack of empathy to be miserable all on his own. Because guess what? He lacks genuine self-esteem in the first instance.
Excellent. Now, we've gone from folks with psychological challenges to folks with real psychological and spiritual or philosophic damage. I want to go to question number 4 here, and we're going to hone in a little bit on what does a healthy self-assertion look like. But first, real quick, I appreciate the comments in the chat. Mary says, agreed, I wouldn't have believed it. It was Ayn Rand and LP that set me straight and taught me why. And again, James, if she's talking about the fact that there really are nihilists, or nihilists, if you prefer, out there, I had a hard time believing it myself. I know there are bad people, and there are degrees of vice and real badness out there, but real evil.
I didn't really buy it until I met certain intellectuals and I got a glimmer. It really didn't sink until I became a criminal prosecutor for 18 years. And I realized listening to these people with their self-reports or reading the forensic psychology reports on these criminals, I realized, no, these people really do not love their own life. They really have no interest in achieving values at all That is not their orientation. They are nihilistic. They are self-destructive. They hate life, and it's that extension of their own distress about life in general and their own life in particular that is extending out in a form of malevolence. And so you'll see a great many criminals who have absolutely no empathy are in fact self-haters. And that is exactly where it's rooted, this total lack of empathy. Or even still worse, people who get their kicks off inflicting suffering and pain on innocent people. Those kind of people are really inverted, and the inversion starts in their self-estimate. In their self, they hate their life, and it's an emanation of that hatred of life, that hatred of the good for being the good, as Ayn Rand would say, so vividly depicted in the character James Taggart in Atlas Shrugged, for folks familiar with that book.
Yes. You're right. The worse than the amoralist is the conscious, willful immoralist who would rather be miserable himself if that's what it takes to make sure you are never happy.
Right.
Well, we have happier people than that in the chat. I want to give a shout out to adherent of Lady of Columbia, who is now a member of the YouTube channel. I appreciate that. You can join the Ayn Rand Center UK YouTube channel, get access to some perks that are exclusive to YouTube. And our member has done that. Thank you for that. I want to give a huge shout out to Wes Stewart, who is in with a super chat, very generous super chat to the Ayn Rand Center UK. And that is appreciated as well, especially because the chat is quiet today. We've got live listeners, but folks, I think are just digging it, just getting into what is being said today. It's an important conversation for me, James, because again, this union of psychology and philosophy and how this plays out in people that I am challenged to even believe in, much less understand. This is valuable to me. And I want to jump to the positive side of this, because question number 4 that you've chosen for us here, super short. Question number 4. I am self-absorbed. Is that bad? I'm trying to think of the kind of person who would describe himself or herself as self-absorbed.
I know, just go right out of it. I'm self-absorbed.
I am that.
I'm totally
yet,
myself.
I've known those folks, and some of them are more self-aware than others. So
Yes.
pretty bold to put that out there.
Yes.
And Leonard Peikoff has a longer answer. I'll read the beginning, and I want to hear your thoughts on this. Quoting Leonard Peikoff, self-absorption is not the same thing as egoism. Well, if you are self-absorbed, that means essentially you are uninterested in or indifferent to other people, including your friends, and to what's going on in the world. You're interested only in what you see within yourself, not in what is outside yourself as you see it. Well, you want to talk with others only about your own problems, only about your own issues. You may be indifferent even to the feelings of your sex partner because, well, you're self-absorbed. Well, this attitude is not good, and it is not egoistic because it is cut off from human values in reality. It amounts to the statement, well, I don't care to discover or respond to or act to promote values in other human beings, even though and when it is to my own selfish interest, when in fact it's harmful to cut myself off that way from all of these potential values. It's an attitude that comes essentially, I believe, from a lack of self-confidence. Whatever the problem is, though, it's a problem and requires therapy. And Dr. Peikoff goes on, but yes, to conflate self-absorption with self-confidence or self-assertion, again, it's easy to make that mistake unless you've met somebody who really is self-absorbed and isn't engaging with others on a deep level, who is cutting himself off.
Consider Howard Roark. Howard Roark is super absorbed by his work. His work comprises most of his life. He is really into his work, and he's work focused. In that sense, he's reality focused. He's focused on his reason's ability to solve problems. He is a reason and reality self-esteem grounded guy who doesn't much care if the entire architectural world disagrees with him. His self-esteem is utterly detached from what other architects or architecture critics might think of what is the best. He's doing what he believes is the best. And that is the source. His confidence in his mind, his reality orientation towards the achievement of his values is the source of his self-esteem. Now, consider, Ayn Rand's working title for The Fountainhead was Secondhand Lives. Consider some of the other characters, in particular, say, Peter Keating. He is a man seeking not to be, as it's put in the novel, not to be a great architect, but to be thought of as a great architect. He wants the prestige. He wants the fame. He wants to please his ambitious mother. He is what many people would regard as ambitious. He is what many people would regard as self-absorbed in one sense. And he's self-absorbed in a totally different way than Howard Roark is. He wants to get ahead. He is ruthless in one sense, but in a social climbing way to get ahead. And that quest for prestige is precisely the manifestation of a lack of authentic self-esteem. He is in chronic need of the approval of Ellsworth Toohey or his mother or the critics or others. He wants to please. He wants to be seen as. And this is the main way in which our pseudo self-esteem will manifest itself. But more than that, let's look at, say, the lone wolf who just, yeah, okay, I'm so self-absorbed, I can just go off to a cabin and live all by myself. I don't really give a hoot whatever anyone else does or thinks at all. People can have no value to me. In fact, I'd be risking it to reach out and take a risk and maybe engage in business relationships or romantic relationships because, gosh, that subjects me to the risk of loss, failure, harm. Now, that is a person who's obviously lacking confidence. He is, once again, what we're seeing, or the person who seeks power over others in The Fountainhead. Now, I wouldn't, Gil Wynand is a complex character in many, many ways, but still it's a form of dependency on others. It's not that serene self-esteem that we see in Howard Roark. Howard Roark, when asked by the leading architecture critic, what do you think of me? He says, but I don't think of you. And he just proceeds to do things the way he knows they should be done. That's where his quiet, calm self-esteem in himself comes from. Yes, other people are important to him. He has important friendships. He's in love with Dominique. He is working over a process of years on that relationship. He's very close to Gail Wynand through a long portion of the book. He comes and saves Stephen Mallory. He develops a cool friendship with a construction worker, Mike. Other people are selected. Other people are a high value and an important value to Roark, but he's not out there to please people in general. If you're out there to please people in general or to gain prestige or to impress other people as your primary motive, let me suggest you are not after self-esteem. You are in fact attempting to assuage your chronic lack of a genuine self-esteem, that self-esteem that you can only get with that guy in the mirror.
Leonard Peikoff goes on with his answer here, and apropos of what you're saying, you should be absorbed in reality and in all the aspects that entails for a successful life, including the values in human beings and the interest in those values. If you are, quote, self-absorbed, well, the wording implies self versus everything else. At least that's how the distinction would be made. There are cases in which you're acting truly egoistically, but people would call you self-absorbed. Right. That's not self-absorption in the sense that I just meant. If it is, it's good because it's necessary.
No, that would be like Howard Roark's devotion to his work. I mean, yes. He's committed 90% of the time to doing his work. And when you walk into his apartment, it's basically just a workspace for Howard Roark. He is very, very work-oriented, but that's reality orientation, you see? It's his reason, his orientation to reality on which his self-esteem is based, not the opinions of others. And that's the critical distinction. If your self-esteem is has anything to do, your alleged self-esteem has anything to do with really appeasing or pleasing or satisfying others simply because they're others. That's not self-esteem at all. That's in fact a chronic lack of self-esteem, like these secondhand lives in the fountainhead that Ayn Rand is talking about, versus the genuine self-esteem of Howard Roark, which is reason and reality based. See, Howard Roark doesn't spend a whole lot of time about Howard Roark. He can walk down the street with buttons missing on his shirt. And in fact, in the early scene, we're told that he could have walked down the central street of the town naked, and it wouldn't have bothered him at all. That's how little he's concerned about what other people think. So it's his orientation to reality, not to other people. And that really is the test, in my mind, of a healthy self-esteem. In one sense, you could look at anxiety. In one sense, you could look at the hallmark of neurosis, anxiety, as a kind of chronic crisis in self-esteem. Anxiety isn't a fear. I mean, if you point a gun at me, I'm going to be scared. If you try to push me off a cliff, I'm going to be there. I have good reason, factual reason to be afraid. But if I say walk into a party and I just have this queasy sense of insecurity, then it's something I'm carrying with me. It's not some specific fear there at the cocktail party. I'm just feeling insecure. Maybe people won't like me. Maybe I'm not socially adept. And so this anxiety thing, as opposed to a specific fear, is about me. It's a fear about me. It's a fear that I'm not worthy or I'm not able to cope. And that is the manifestation of it. The manifestation of a lack of self-esteem is just that. Not the presence of self-esteem. People have it exactly upside down. Anxiety, and maybe not all neurosis, but anxiety and most neurosis, in effect, boils down to a chronic lack of self-esteem. It's a self-esteem crisis, not a healthy self-esteem at all. It's what I was saying in the very beginning. Ayn Rand identified self-esteem as an important, cardinal, irreplaceable value for every human consciousness. And if you don't earn correct self-esteem, grounded in your confidence in your own reason, grounded in the facts of reality, then your mind will develop some way to assuage that, to bandage that lack, to bandage that wounded self-esteem, and it will come out in these pathological, neurotic ways. Anxiety, neurosis, self-absorption is a classic one. The boastful guy who needs to impress someone, the guy who lies to impress some girl to get her in bed, the guy who lies to get a job, the guy who lies to himself in order to get him through the day. Those are people who don't have a healthy self-esteem based in their confidence in their own reason, do they? They're actually bandaging a major wound in their self-esteem. And let me suggest that most neurosis and a good deal of rotten behavior is grounded in just that kind of lack of self-esteem motivation.
You know, it's interesting that you use the Howard Roark reference, the Fountainhead, for so many examples, because the description of friendships and other relationships in the Fountainhead, to me, is a model for a lot of us. And Howard Roark, not only does he have great friendships, but his friendships are contextual. They're, if I can use a modern phrase, they're right-sized. I love when he's talking to Austin Heller, and Heller's sharing his talking about their friendship. And at one point, Austin Heller says, it's just like you after, I've after you've shared what you thought, you didn't ask me what I thought. And Roark says, I do care what you think. It just didn't come up for me. And him and Heller have a great relationship. It's a very respectful relationship. It's based on values, just like him and Sean Xavier Donegan, Mike, and Mallory. But they're different kinds of relationships. So later, when he meets Gail Wynand, when he finds a real brother, a real soulmate, for their enormous respect for values in the world, despite the way Gail Wynand is living that, Roark totally lets Wynand in a way that, and he says, I'm saying this to you, I couldn't say it to any of these others. But earlier in the relationship, there's a quote I've got in front of me here, where they're talking, and Howard Roark is saying, yeah, I don't have those kind of relationships where I just strip myself naked. He says, because Winan was testing him, Rourke says, I can't give you the recognition of having made me suffer, but you'll take the substitute of having given me pleasure, won't you?
I love
Only Winan would understand what
right,
a vulnerability, what an admission that is.
right.
Rourke says, all right, then, I'm glad you like me. I think you know this is as much an exception for me as you're taking a beating. I don't usually care whether I'm liked or not. I do care this time. I'm glad.
You see, people like Gail, what's interesting in the Fountainhead is that even our arch individualist it makes himself vulnerable. He can really be hurt by what Dominique does. He can really be hurt by what Gail Winan does when they become close. For Howard Rourke, love does not mean that I'm insulated and protected and no one can hurt my feelings and I don't care about other people and I don't have close relationships with people. No, sir. For Howard Rourke, selfishness involves the important value that others can represent. And when he makes a close relationship with someone like Dominique or Gail, they can hurt him. He is making himself vulnerable to others. So many people have this notion that self-esteem and self-sufficiency requires that I not depend on others, even emotionally, that I somehow be an island unto myself, and that I not have close personal relationships. Nothing could be further from the truth. You cannot get the best value from life. You cannot get the most out of life, squeeze all the juice out of life, unless you do take that risk and get close with people and make yourself vulnerable to people who are worth it in your judgment. Don't just go out there and sign blank checks to people. No, 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 no. Howard Rourke does not do that. It is only in the very rare exception where the person really does impress his mind as someone who shares his values or embodies his values. Now he's willing to take that risk, but he's willing to take that risk with other people. He is not a loner. He is not a lone wolf. He knows the importance of especially close personal relationships. Dominique and Gail can hurt Howard Rourke, but Ellsworth Toohey and the critics and the newspaper people, they can't touch him. They can't even touch him.
Right. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because there's a conversation going on online right now, and most folks won't know about this, but there's a group on Facebook called the John Galt Line, and they're discussing the topic of people who don't have a real lust for life, a real passion, a joie de vivre. And since the whole concept of value requires first the decision to live, this is a bit of an issue for some folks. And I think it would help a lot if people who feel this sense of alienation from values, which often ties in with alienation from other people, from the value of other people in your life, to realize, yeah, you've got to right size your relationships. You don't have to be as vulnerable to the wait staff at your favorite restaurant. You can be as kind and benevolent with them without
Open up
being
to the
vulnerable.
Open up to the busboy and tell them all about your childhood traumas, or your ambitions and dreams in life. No. You don't.
Yes, and you don't need to feel like there's a wall between you and your wait staff, and therefore there's a wall between you and your family. There's a wall between you and everybody who's ever hurt you. No, right. Tear down those walls. You don't need walls between you and the waitress. She's fine. She's good. Right. You can be friendly with her, but you're not vulnerable in the way that, for example, Rourke is to Winan. And once you realize that, I hope that folks can feel, oh, I can engage. I can engage with people, and being nice to somebody who might turn out to be a dirty amoralist is not a great risk. You can do this. You can have the courage and the confidence to open yourself up to relationships on all levels.
And when and if that person actually does touch you in such a profound way and the deepest of your values, then do take that risk. Then do give it a shot, because the value of other people is real, but only under certain circumstances. And the higher your standards about that, the more demanding your standards about that, the more your authentic self-esteem, let me suggest, the more you respect yourself, the more you want the most out of life for you. But to want the most out of life does sometimes require that we take that risk of being vulnerable and getting close and opening up, because then we're going to get the real ka-ching value, spiritual values that other people can offer us, that profound visibility for who and what we are.
Yeah. And if the question of not taking all values as being equal getting in the way of you having those relationships isn't clear enough,
Right.
let me just read the end of Leonard Peikoff's answer here to that question.
Right.
There are cases in which you are acting truly egoistically, but people will call you self-absorbed. Now, that is not self-absorption in the sense I just meant. If it is, well, it's good because it's necessary. For instance, imagine some emergency in which a good friend or his child may be in danger, may be sick, may require your assistance, but it's a situation in which it's your child versus his. Well, you simply say to yourself, I'm concerned with my child above everything else, even a close friend and his child. Well, that is egoism, but would commonly be called self-absorbed. And unless you use absorbed as meaning nothing but self-interested, well, that is perfectly rational. It's part of holding values in reality. You should have a value focus, and you should do it in the name of your own well-being. You are the number one value. But you should recognize that the number one value requires, in its full achievement and development, the recognition of an interest in values, relevant values in other people. Unquote Leonard Peikoff, March 2011. So
Wow.
yes, it's an integration. It was always a false alternative.
Always.
But it's not a matter of being reckless. I love
Well, can you imagine some psychotic is running at you screaming, Robert, Robert, I'm going to kill you. And he's holding a knife over his head and he's running at you with this knife saying, I'm going to kill you, Robert, I'm going to kill you. If you acted in self-defense, someone saying, well, you know, Robert was awfully self-absorbed. You know, Robert was so self-absorbed, he saved his own life. He was willing to injure this other guy to prevent this destruction of himself. Why, he was putting himself above the attacker. We would say, yeah, that's good, that's moral, that's the correct behavior. Now, when it comes to, say, for example, you could only save one kid, your kid or the neighbor's kid, and you put your kid first. What's wrong with that? Nothing is wrong with that. That is actually not self-absorption in any way at all. That is actually having a hierarchy of values based in reason and reality. You have every reason to prefer your kid's life over someone else's kid. I'm sorry, my kid comes first is not an example of self-absorption at all, but reality orientation. That's true egoism. Now,
right.
On the other hand, so what a bizarre package deal. Peikoff is actually pointing out self-absorption is often used to describe perfectly healthy, in fact, moral and sometimes heroic behavior is called self-absorbed. That's upside down, backwards, inside out. No, self-absorption is when, now get this, the greatest, the true hallmark of self-absorption is when you're hurting yourself, when you're losing out on the values in reality because you're so focused on your own issues. That's what Leonard Peikoff was pointing out there. Rather than being a reason and reality oriented sort of self-esteem, which would have you enjoying the entire banquet of life, taking that risk to have close relationships, going for it in your career, having that amazing time. What you're doing is you're reality oriented, and you're going to get the values back from that in a happy way. If you're so self-absorbed that you're wondering what other people are thinking, is this what's going to get me the most prestige? How does this look to other people? How can you ever really not have an ongoing chronic anxiety, even if you achieve those values, even if people are impressed? You're never really going to be happy. You're still going to have this chronic anxiety because your orientation was them, not reality and what your real values were. So what people often call self-absorption is in fact very, very moral behavior, reason, reality oriented behavior. The bad thing of self-absorption, me, talking about me all day long. You notice how Howard Rourke doesn't talk me all day long. Whereas you'll have villains in the Fountainhead doing just that. Oh, well, I did this, and I don't subscribe to Wine and Papers, and I had a party for so-and-so. Oh, and look at who mentioned me in their column. It's that bogus prestige stuff that Ayn Rand is also making constant quips on in the Fountainhead. You know, on this topic, it's an astonishing thing. Before the great advent of most of the great cognitive psychologists of our time, Ayn Rand wrote this novel, The Fountainhead. Before the advent of psychologists realizing the critical role of self-esteem in psychological health, before they realized the relationship between neurosis and a lack of self-esteem, before they realized, as I say, even the cognitive basis of emotions, Ayn Rand is laying it out here, the cognitive nature of self-esteem and its impact on psychologies throughout the Fountainhead. It is a book of psychological depth, at least on the order of Dostoevsky, probably superior, in my view. It is unlike any book you will ever read because it will give you an understanding of what genuine, authentic self-esteem looks like, as opposed to these pseudo self-esteem, these boasters, these self-absorbed people who can't not think or talk about themselves in some way, versus the reality-oriented person who knows the value of other people, like Howard Rourke, if and when they meet his standards. So on this topic in general, I can think of no better book than The Fountainhead, honestly.
You're making me think of 10 different storylines that relate to that. Consider Peter Keating, who only cares what other people think. And yet, does he care about the well-being of anybody else in that story? Not even the love of his life, Catherine Halsey, as her life is falling apart and she's destroying herself. Does Peter Keating actually care about the well-being of anybody else in the story?
No, he is actually the person who lacks empathy. He can watch the girl he actually really could have loved be utterly destroyed by her uncle Ellsworth Toohey. He can watch himself be destroyed, mind you, by Ellsworth Toohey. But more than that, it's that self. And as I say, that's actually the source, isn't it? Having never achieved actual self-esteem himself, his pseudo self-esteem being based on the opinions of others all his life, all he can do is be an agent of the destruction of his own values. All he can do is be the agent of the destruction. All he can do is be non-empathetic. He could never have built the housing project for the poor known as Cortland. He could never have really, you know what I'm saying? When it comes to actually caring about others, helping others, Peter Keating lacks empathy. He is a cold and callous monster, even though if you were to ask him at some cocktail party, oh, I care about people. I'm a friend of humanity. All I care about is others. But when it comes to reality, he's as cold, callous, and as unfeeling as any character you'll ever find in literature. You said it.
Whereas Howard Rourke, who often doesn't think about anybody else for long stretches of time, is the man who is so in touch with the well-being of his friends. He's murderous when he meets Stephen Mallory and over what's been done to him. He tells Gail Wynan and Dominique that love is the exception making, and he makes those exceptions when it matters. People, in a certain sense, the people who don't matter to him are hardly even real to him, but the people who do matter intensely. They are integrated with his values.
But Howard Rourke says something even remarkable to Peter Keating about Cortland. He said, I will be glad. And he said that to the courtroom speech too. I will be glad if others find value in this housing project. But that wasn't my own primary motivator. No. It was the work and the problem itself and my ability to solve it, my reason and reality orientation that it was all about. But he will be happy, he says. He will enjoy it that other people got a value from it. He wants, for example, the design of Winan's country home. The convenience of it is designed for their convenience. He's not going to be living at this home. But the fact that it is so convenient for them is a value to him in designing that does it matter to him that the people who live there will get the morning sun? Yes. Does it matter to him that the folks who move into Monadnock are going to be living in this world that just is benevolent by its, and humans and nature somehow completing one another in this wonderful description of Monadnock? It will be a spiritual enhancement to them to live in such a community. And of course, Howard Roark cares about that, but that's not his primary motivator. His primary orientation remains his own judgment, his own confidence, and his own reason.
Yes, as selfish as Howard Roark is, yeah, he doesn't spend a lot of time looking in the mirror. He looks at the world. He's looking out at values,
and that leads us able to. And it may not be his primary motivator. No. He does care about it, but because it's not his primary motivator, he's actually able to make a difference. He's actually able to help the poor, build a better mousetrap, have this wonderfully beautiful home for this couple. He's able to achieve values for others because he's achieving his own in the first instance.
Yes, before you can get things done for others, you must be a man who can get things done. Now, there's a term that floats around, has a couple of different meanings, and it's our final question. And we're not quite at the top of the hour, so we've got a few minutes to discuss this. And it really hit me when I saw this question, because I know this guy too. Leonard Peikoff was asked this 3-word question: is narcissism irrational? And Leonard Peikoff did not give the answer that I expected. Of course, I love his answer.
Right
away, we think of Echo and Narcissus. And we think, well, he was miserable, spent all day staring in a mirror, couldn't even hear Echo, who could only echo his statements, the woman who would have been the love of his life. But no, he was in love with that guy in the mirror. But Leonard Peikoff says, again, surprised me a little bit here, but of course I can't disagree. Quote, here's an interesting question that's never been asked of me. I have to say, first of all, I've always liked the myth of Narcissus. I always took it as a great expression of egoism. I think I went out of my way to end my first book with a reference to narcissism. To me, it has totally positive connotations. I looked it up in the dictionary, though, and this is the definition. This is the definition he pulled from the dictionary. Erotic gratification derived from admiration of one's own body or mind. Then he goes on. You see from that definition that most people today denounce narcissism because it is self-admiration, self-love, self-esteem.
Right.
They even define that now as a sickness. There's a huge assault on narcissism because people think that in that way they're getting at selfishness. Now, admiration of oneself is certainly a value. It's almost mandatory that you earn it and that you feel it. But this is the point. Usually you take it for granted. Your mind and your body, your skills and your achievements. You don't wake up in the morning and say, God, I'm so thin, or God, I'm so smart. It's just you. If you have some special achievement on a given day, well, you can engage that and take pleasure in it. But in the normal course of affairs, you're looking out at the world. You're not focused inward as a general thing.
Right.
And these people are implying that narcissism is an inward orientation as a way of life, that your whole focus is on admiration of yourself versus the world. Well, I say, well, there may be degrees of this. I can see standing in front of a mirror, reading a book on your own, or something like that. I don't think there's a way to define degrees, but if you have to stay and stand in front of a mirror all day, and you get much more out of that than looking at somebody else, well, then I think you have a problem.
Yeah.
Now, he's going to go on a bit here, but I have to admit that resonated a bit with me because totally. I don't stand in front of a mirror, but I do listen, for example, to my own podcasts. And I have to admit, when they're good, I get a kind of a thrill out of that.
Right. And there's nothing wrong with that. And there's nothing wrong. If you're a good looking person and you say, hey, I'm good looking, what's wrong with that? It's recognizing and taking inventory of your own value. And there's nothing on earth. Leonard Peikoff, I was almost surprised he didn't notice this in his answer. In the book Anthem, Ayn Rand has a sort of tribute to the myth of Narcissus. When the hero of the story escapes into the forest, the society's become so primitive, you don't have mirrors or good mirrors anymore. And so he's been told all his life that he's different, different, different. And that's bad, 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 simply because he's different. And when he goes into the forest, he actually catches a glimpse of himself as he goes down for a drink of water, and he sees his reflection in the water. And I can only think that's a poetic reference to Narcissus, because he reflects upon himself and he says, wait a minute here. I had nothing to fear from this guy. This guy's actually a good-looking guy. Hey, this guy's a good guy. I like this guy. He suddenly looked at himself and fell in love. And is there anything wrong with that? No, I am good. I am worthy. Hey, I'm not the scary guy people told me. I'm the Frankenstein's monster everyone told me I was. I can trust that guy I'm looking at. And in a sense, that's sort of a tribute to Narcissus looking in the water, seeing his own image, and suddenly realizing his value. There's a wonderful moment in Anthem just like that. So no, narcissism is, again, like self-absorption, a kind of package deal. Sometimes even worse. I think even more commonly, narcissism is described, used to describe perfectly healthy expressions of self-esteem. Look, if I did do something and I say, hey, I'm proud I did something, or no, hey, if someone's challenging me on something, no, I'm confident that I did that right, or I'm confident I'm good in this way. There is absolutely nothing wrong with that. It's healthy. It's the healthy response to say, I am good, or this is a virtue of mine, or this is something cool about me. There is nothing on earth that's wrong about that. Now, would that be your focus? Of course not. It's only a moment for the hero of Anthem because he's never seen himself before, and he's been told by others what a funny looking wretch he is. And that's what gives that moment poignance, when he sees that he's a good looking person after all, that he can trust in looking back at him. That is a glorious moment because he's overcoming the negative opinion that others had of him, you see. But even just that that recognition of your own value, I'm going to come right back to where I started. Self-esteem is one of the three cardinal values that no human being, no human consciousness can do without. It really is. But if it's not grounded in that other primary value, reason, then it's going to find its outlet in forms of pseudo self-esteem. The narcissist is not just the erotic narcissist. That's only one definition of it that Leonard Peikoff gets into here. More commonly, if you look at I'm not a big fan of the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual, the main psychological diagnostic manual, the DSM. I think they're DSM-5 now. We're up to the 5th edition, where they're constantly changing the definitions and descriptions of different psychological disorders, calling new ones psychological disorders, getting some off the list. I don't trust that at all. I think psychology is in a very primitive state today, and a lot of that is dubious stuff. On the other hand, if you look at narcissism in the DSM-5, they will tell you that it is characterized not merely by a kind of self-absorption, but by a lack of empathy that characterizes narcissism. And I have to say that even in the non-erotic context, that is one of the characteristics that is also similar, say, with the antisocial personality or the sociopath we were talking about earlier. They lack that love for their own life in the first instance that would permit them to be empathetic. No one, and this is a final thought I wanted to make today, no one who truly loves their own life can lack empathy for other human beings. The love of life will extend benevolently. No, not to vicious criminals and murderers who are destroying life. In fact, your love for your life will cause you to be angry and want justice for those monsters. But all other things being equal, you're going to give benefit of the doubt to strangers and hope they turn out good. All other things being equal, when you find a value, you're going to try and pursue it in another human being. Humans are a real selfish value to me, but only under certain circumstances. But it is only my own passionate love for my own life that can be the source for empathy, for taking others into account, especially those who matter to me and who are of value to me. It is inconceivable to me. I would be crushed at the idea of hurting someone else, just in general, who is innocent. But utterly devastated if I even accidentally hurt somebody that I cared about. I would do everything I could to make up for it. Why? Because it's my value. It's my pride when I'm looking in the mirror. Am I loyal to my values? Am I being the reason and reality oriented? And that's what this really comes down to, ladies and gentlemen. Empathy is a perfectly healthy, wonderful, selfish feeling towards other people in most cases, but it can only come from a passionate love of your own life.
Couldn't say it better. I always think of Heinlein, who said, love is that state in which the happiness of another person is essential to your own. It doesn't put them ahead of you, but the point is they matter to
well, what
you.
you've done is you
value to you.
That's it. My happiness now has a new need and facet. Your well-being. I've incorporated your well-being now to different degrees. Obviously, I mean, no one's. I got to take care of number one first, obviously, but to various degrees, their happiness, their well-being matters to me. If you're not happy, Robert, I care about you. You're a value to me, a selfish value to me. You're a selfish value. You are an actual positive human value out there in the world doing good things. If you are not happy, if things are going wrong for you, I am distressed. That's bad news for me. Bad news for me that you, my value, are not happy. And that's what Heinlein, I think, is really getting at here. And the one way, the real hallmark signature of a friend is exactly that. Does your happiness or well-being matter to this other person?
Yes.
If not, they are no true friend. On the other hand, is this friendship really based on real shared values, or are you just trying to impress someone, add to your social score, win some popularity contest, etc.? If they're a real value to you, then you care, and their actual well-being matters to you because of your selfishness, not in spite of it.
Yes. Now Leonard Peikoff in his answer does address that idea of erotic gratification being a part of narcissism. I won't distract the conversation with that, but folks, you can look up that answer online on your own. You did mention the myth of Echo and Narcissus, and Narcissus, of course, becomes enraptured with the view of himself, his own reflection, and the common denominator of that in the story of Frankenstein. And then you mentioned Anthem. Well, in Anthem, of course, Liberty 53000, or the golden one, as she is at that point, bit of a spoiler here, but when they encounter a modern home that's still in a condition where they can go in and see the amazing things before everything fell apart, and Liberty 53000 finds a mirror. And for the rest of the day, she can't be torn away from it. She falls asleep in front of the mirror. You know, the next day, she's not going to be staring in the mirror all day and can't be pulled away. She's going to live her life. But that combination, that integration of self-love and love for this life and for the people that matter to you, that is the way. That's what we're looking for.
Exactly. They lived in a society that had eradicated the first person pronoun. There's no word I or me anymore in their language. They are told that they live for the collective, that their sex lives and their careers must be dictated by others, and that they're really slaves to the community. And they're not given any sense of self-esteem. They're only given numbers, not names. So that when they do, if the hero looks at himself and takes a moment in the water to say, wait a minute, I'm not Frankenstein's monster. I can trust this guy looking back at me. Or if the golden one looks in the mirror and falls asleep for the first time, actually able to contemplate herself, I'm going to give her all, something? I'm going to give her all the next day to looking in the mirror, coming from the society of individual hatred that she came from, where her self-esteem was under constant assault. I'm going to give her a couple of days in front of that mirror so she can finally start to appreciate the exquisite value that she is and should recognize herself to be. Amen.
And if that's not clear enough, since you've given us the bit of a spoiler there, when Prometheus rediscovers the word I, he explains it. He explains it to the golden one. And what is the first thing she said?
I would cry when I see you. No, you're not going to make me say that, because
We'll
that's
leave that as a spoiler. If you haven't read Anthem or haven't read it in a while,
who's listening to us now, if you want to know one of the lines that will cause me to cry reading Ayn Rand, I can read that book 100 times, and it's that line that will break me down. You can see it's happening already, folks. That line will break me down every time.
Yes. So instead, what I'm going to do is go to something that I also am very deeply touched by, but won't turn on the waterworks. Thank you. Thank you. We've got a couple more super chats before we wrap up a little late here. Buster Jones is in for $5 and says, I just tuned in today's show. The theme to this topic, I can't wait I can't wait to grab a copy of Don Watkins' new book, Effective Egoism. Well, haha, I've already got a copy, although I have to admit I haven't opened and read it yet. I need to do that once I catch up here. Effective Egoism by Don Watkins, a pre-release version, was given to the folks who participated in OCON 2023 this year. Is that a great answer to the effective altruism movement, or what? Somebody, of course, was going to release a book called Effective Egoism. I'm glad that it was Don Watkins who has done it.
Don Watkins, I think these effective altruism people have just met their swan song. I think their history now. They've been answered so thoroughly and so completely now that I think we can, I hope that culturally we can turn our attention to more sane individuals and thoughts. That effective altruism nonsense is just that, nonsense. And again, one of these ridiculous anti-egoism package deals that were being shoved down our throat. So yes, congratulations to both you and Don Watkins for your brilliant critiques of that nonsense.
Thank you. I did have a great time doing that episode on long-termism, Will McCaskill's book, and of course, he being the intellectual leader of the effective altruism movement. Folks, you can find that one online too. And then another shout out, Frank Gil Lombardo has a great comment here that could spark a whole different conversation. Maybe we'll do an episode on this. It's fascinating to me, and I'll tell you why. Here's what he says. In lots of Woody Allen movies, the characters often cheat on their lovers or partners. In Crossing the Line, cheating, is it more narcissistic or egoist?
Oh.
To me, that's a false alternative. I don't think it's either one of those.
Cheating, that is to say, lying to someone you claim to care about. That is to say, having a sexual relationship and wanting to maintain the other relationship in a dishonest way. That is sheer narcissism, pure narcissism. It's pseudo self-esteem. In fact, you're trying to gain self-esteem in an anti-rational, non-reality, other-oriented way. If I have this person's approval and I can get away and still have this affair, oh, look how wonderful I am. See the buttressing to my self-esteem that I'm giving myself, these bandages I'm giving to what is in fact a chronic lack of self-esteem. If you had confidence in yourself, you would be honest with everyone you cared about. You would not lie. You would give everyone a chance to make their own adult decisions about such matters, and you wouldn't cheat on your partner.
And for your own sake, because you take your values seriously.
Dishonesty is inherently unselfish. Dishonesty is inherently interfering with you getting your values. Anytime you're using dishonesty to gain a value like that, you are not only hurting yourself, but as I said, it is that self-hatred which is now emanating in a total lack of empathy. You are going to hurt maybe both people's feelings because of your lie. Yes. So notice the relationship between this lack of empathy. The pain you're going to cause from the lie of cheating is directly connected to your chronic lack of self-esteem.
Yes.
If you were a rationally confident person, you would be honest about your values to everyone that mattered. Huh?
Yes. But it's a complicated topic, and I'll tell you why. And Frank, thanks for the question. I've mentioned this before. How many stories, how many novels, how many plays, how many plots, and even in Ayn Rand's universe, how many of these stories would not exist if everybody just told the truth all the time?
Right.
We the Living, even Atlas Shrugged, not so much The Fountainhead, but how many of these stories would just fall apart if everybody was honest all the time? There would be no novels. There would be no stories. Half of the movies out there wouldn't exist. It's a great question from Frank. It deserves a whole episode. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I'm enough of a narcissist to think I'm the one who could do that subject justice, but I've had that thought before that, if everybody would just tell the truth all the time, almost all of these problems would go away. But it turns out it's not as simple as that. There's much more to it than that. I don't want to be simplistic in that regard. James, this is a great conversation. We're running way over our usual time, and I hope that we haven't tested the patience of the folks listening, but I think your insights and Dr. Peikoff's insights have been more than worth the time. Thank you for that. And I've got to let you go because you've got an episode coming up. The Daily Objective goes live at 6 p.m. UK time. That's 1 o'clock here on the East Coast. That would be, I guess, 10 o'clock your time, James. And that's going to be a good episode. Where the question is, does politics, yeah, get back to politics. Does politics today need more money? What are you talking about? Money is what corrupts everything. It's the whole Hunter Biden thing. It's everything that's wrong with Trump. It's everything that's destroying politics. But wait a minute. Wouldn't free speech mean? Well, I'm going to let you cover that at 1 o'clock, 6 o'clock UK time. Folks, we need to let James go, let him get back to work. But we've also got a great episode of The Cutting Edge coming up where they're going to review some of the real cutting edge topics that they've talked about before. I want to hear some of those answers as well from Lee Pearson, Dr. Pearson. He's also going to have Shoshana Milgram on the show this afternoon/evening. So make sure you listen to that as well. Great content coming up. Thank you for the super chat supporting the Ayn Rand Center UK. If you're not already a member, click that link at the top. If you're not already a member of the YouTube channel, hit that one as well. James, thank you for an outstanding discussion.
Thank you, sir. Take care, my friends.